So we are all here to talk about the film 127 Hours, or at least listen to other people talk about it. And what ideal people. I'm delighted we're joined by the team who are behind 127 Hours. You probably recall their previous film. It did OK. They are producer Christian Colson and director Danny Boyle.
Hello.
How you doing?
Hey. Hello.
Hello. Hello. How are you both? You all right?
Yeah, very good.
Very good. Thank you for coming in and chatting to us. Do you enjoy doing these sort of things as a duo? Does it make it easier?
Much easier.
It's much better, actually, doing them together, yeah, definitely.
Well, I think we'll be the judge. We will.
Good crowd. Thank you
I guess, first of all, when did you each become aware of Aron Ralston's incredible story?
Well, I heard about it in 2003, which is when it happened. I read about it in the newspapers, and it's one of those stories like the Chilean miners that snags in your brain. And I think it's because I've had a lot of time to think about it, of course, since. I think it's because it's one of those where you put yourself in that position. You think, would I do that? Could I do that if I was there? And like with the Chilean miners, it's a bit more fun because it's obviously you think, would I be the sporty one, or would I be the medic, or the brave one, or the priest, or
which is it?
The snivelling weak one.
Which would you be?
The snivelling weak one.
Sure.
But in this case, it's not quite so much fun because it's actually what would I do with my arm if I was stuck there like that. But anyway, and then I read his book in 2006, and it was amazing. I had a very kind of intense feeling of knowing how to do it, which is you don't get very often, and I sort of knew I wanted to make it like we made it, and we approached Aron about it, but he wanted to make it as a documentary then, whereas I wanted to make it with an actor, and you lose yourself in an actor playing the part. It's just like any fiction film, really, and that you go on the journey with him, and it becomes a kind of a first-person immersive experience. So, but we had to wait until we had a hit. We got Slumdog, and then that allowed us to get finance for the film, because it's obviously a tough film to finance, I think.
Yeah, what did convince you that it would be better as a feature than as a feature doc? Because something like Touch and the Void, you kind of think, well, yeah, that was fantastic, and in similar territory.
Well, I think it's that quality of immersion that a feature film can give you that a documentary can never can, or prose either. I mean, Aron's book is fantastically well written, but not obviously in film. I first read it in 2009. It'd been knocking around Danny's head 3 years. And I read the story and thought it was fantastic, but how do you make a movie out of this? It's one guy, one location, very little dialogue. But he figured out a way to do it. And I think if you can pull it off as a movie, what you get is you're putting the audience through the experience in a way that no other medium can replicate. And I think it's just much more intense.
But, I mean, there are, if you just sort of look at the story on the face of it, the limitations are quite severe. You've got one person, sort of one location. The audience know what's going to happen. So in a way, you've got to create your own tension, your own drama, because they know. So when you first approached it, how did you convince yourself that you could do it?
I think it was because it's very it's not like movies have become. They just explode things bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and obviously CG has allowed us to do that. You can blow up anything now, literally anything. And so there's another side of cinema which is extraordinary, which is when it magnifies things. And the basic thing cinema does, and that we all love, is you take a human head. Your head is what, about 8-9 inches high, like that.
It's a big head. Yeah.
But when you do it with an actor, it becomes 40 feet high in a kind of place, in a dark hole, in this room you go to with strangers and sit there. And there's something weird about that, and very, very important about that. The actors may be awful people who are in celebrity magazines and things like that, but for some reason we fall in love with them, or we hate them, but we want to go and watch them. And like Russell Crowe's a very good example, for instance, and about what people feel about it. But there's something about them that you want to kind of watch them on that scale. And this story does that more than anything else, because it gives him, the only thing he's got to perform with is a rock. And of course, the rock's not going to be very interesting. So it means you've got to find the right actor you're just going to be able to cut to the whole time,
Do you find yourself sort of drawn to stuff that is more challenging? I imagine that if someone says to you, no, that's not going to work as a film, it's like a red rag to a bull. If someone says to you, go with an easier project.
No, it depends who's saying that, of course, and what the project is. I never really wanted to make big, huge movies, because I love watching them, and people like Chris Nolan and people like that, I admire them enormously, and what they do, and I love watching those movies. But I always think I'm better taking a smaller budget, really, and trying to make it look like $100 million if you can. I don't really. I think if I had $150 million, it would look like 130 by the time it was finished, you know? And I think it's always better to go the other way, because I love that sense of, and it's inbuilt in this story, that sense of limitation, restriction, that there's a kind of challenge inherent in the movie. I love that, because and then you try and persuade the crew and everybody to become, you try and be evangelical with them and make them go on a mission with you to convert people to the movie, you know, because people often suspect that will never make a movie, like Trainspotting, things like that, you know.
How quickly did Danny convince you that he could pull this off?
Well, he sent me the book, and then he sent me a treatment that he'd written. He has a 6-page outline. I don't know how many of you have seen the film, but which began to outline a grammar by which we could overcome some of these obstacles that you've been talking about in terms of the location, the one character, the no dialogue. And it involved, it was a particular way of telling a story which magnified tiny incidents, so that really, really tiny things like the sun coming up, or the character dropping his knife, or close-up of an eye, take on this very disproportionate significance. It's a great way to tell the story through the aggregation of tiny details, but also the camera becoming the narrator. That was in the original treatment, as a way of keeping movement in something which, if you do it wrong, will always be static. When I read that, I was convinced pretty quickly. Yeah.
Did you feel that your hands were tied, which is not the right choice of phrase, by making a film with the actual person kind of looking over your shoulder?
I'd never done it before. It's weird, because you obviously you have to respect him, because it's extraordinary what he did, and he has his own telling of the story. But you have to say to him, we want to tell our own version. And although we want you, and we showed him the script, and he helped us, and he was in rehearsals with us, once we actually started shooting, I said, I don't want you around the whole time, because I want the story to happen to James Franco, the actor. I don't want him looking over his shoulder the whole time thinking, how did you do it? Because you'll sense that hesitation in the piece, you know, and it'll start to feel more like a documentary in a way. Whereas you wanted it to be, and you like you said, the difference between a documentary like Touching the Void and this, and in the end it's emotional, is the biggest difference. Is that what you get with a fiction is that what we try to do at the end of this film is you get this emotional charge running through it, where you've invested in this actor like we do, and that in some way you want him to get out of there, and you're prepared to almost help him. And then when he does get out of there, you get that rush of ocean to the heart, which is emotion, where you lose rationality. Because obviously James Franco didn't actually cut his arm off. You know that, but you just you help him do it in a way and go with it and believe it's real. And that's what I love about fiction films. And I think you can get at truth better in a way than through documentary in a way. You get at a greater truth through them.
I agree with all that, but you do have a responsibility when you're telling a story based on the experiences of a living subject to get it more or less right factually as well. So it was a balance we had to find between being true to Aron's story but still making it our own film. Yeah,
well, I suppose my sole criticism really is that Franco wasn't quite method enough. He could have turned the arm off, couldn't he? Let's have a little look at him in the incredible Utah landscape near the start of the film. The landscape has obviously been shot many, many times in many, many films, and I guess it was quite important that it looked different in this film. How did you go about achieving that?
I never saw it as a wilderness film. I don't really like wilderness films. In fact, I don't really like the wilderness very much. I find it quite frightening, you know, how quiet it is. Whereas here, it's like just noisy all the time. You know, cities are just
comforting.
Yeah, you go home and people are shouting at each other and outside in the streets, and sirens, and people are dying all over the place. And it's just life, isn't it?
It's your warm feeling.
It's like, it just is, and that's what we all do. We all gather together in cities and kind of curse each other and get on each other's nerves. But these wilderness films, which are meant to be normally about meditation, really, people seek solitariness and isolation. And in fact, the story isn't that, of course, because although he claims he's doing that, he has music on the whole time. He takes a digital camera with him, which you can see that he records himself, everything he's doing. This is like 3 years before YouTube kicked off and people started posting stuff like that. So he's a kind of, you can tell he's an urban creature, really, in a way, who is embracing the wilderness because he's one of those guys, one of those Western state guys from America. So I never really wanted to photograph the landscape in any particular, in a way that was important, other than the beginning, which just sets the context. And then you abandon it because he could have been trapped anywhere. He could have been trapped on the roof of this building if but provided nobody could hear him shout, because he had no view. All he saw was the sky above him, like that, you know. So it wasn't what was important. What was important, ironically, was all these people that he'd left behind. And that's really what the film's about, is that he has to change emotionally in his heart and grow to appreciate the people that he has not really valued fully in his life, really. And it's actually a film about a lot of people, even though there's theoretically only one guy in it.
It's kind of
about the wilderness, you know?
Yeah, him having the kind of realisation that we are a pack animal.
Yes.
Essentially.
Yeah, very much so.
Getting drawn back to that, and that's what gives him the kind of the verve and the steel to get out of the situation he's in.
Yes. Yeah.
The fact that he made these video messages, Aaron, when he was out there, and he actually did, is a real boon, I suppose, as a filmmaker, because that's quite a rarity to have. You know, so you've got the story, you can read the book, but then actually to look and see what his appearance physically in those clips, see how he deteriorates, see, you know, you can kind of see him starting to lose it. How ready was he to show you those, I suppose, is the first thing.
Well, he doesn't show very many people.
No.
He showed them to his mum after he got out, and she was so upset by them that she made him promise that he'd never broadcast them or put them on the internet or anything like that. But we were lucky enough to see them. We couldn't really have made the film unless we'd see them. It was sort of the enabling precondition for us to see those. And they were extraordinary documents. Again, I don't know how many of you have seen the film, but he took a video camera down with him, and he turned it on once a day. He had about an hour of tape, all told. He was re-recording over footage he had of skiing trips and other climbing trips. And he turned it on 5 or 6 minutes every day and just spoke to it. It was his sort of passageway back to all the people that he was thinking about and who he missed and who he loved and all his regrets and all of that. And for us, it was sort of gold dust, really, because it gave us an insight into what was occurring to this character who was dying, basically. And we had the opportunity to see that. And we took some of that material and used it verbatim, and then other times we manipulated it a bit.
The role of Aaron is such a tough one. It's suffocating, it's physically demanding, it's obviously emotionally draining. What made James Franco the right choice?
Well, Pineapple Express actually is the honest answer, because I'd always liked him as an actor, but then I saw Pineapple Express, and it's so. And when you see them do that comedy part as well, because we needed a guy. He is very funny in the film as well, and you need someone who's going to play the comedian and play the villain. Not normally. Other actors play those parts and change the tone of a film, or the director changes the location of a film to refresh you. And James has to do all that work himself, you know. So I always say it's Pineapple Express, really. Although the first time we met him, it was like he was still in Pineapple Express. He was stoned. I mean, he was like. We met him in New York, and it was. I don't even think he knew we were there when we met him. We were in this room, the three of us, and he was like. But it's a technique he has. He doesn't do drugs or drink. He's very abstemious. But I think he puts up this front to kind of suss out what you're after or what you want and stuff like that. And then we met him again, and he read actually one of the verbatim messages that Ralston had left on this tape, and it was amazing actually, because he's not obvious casting. He's not a kind of wilderness kind of guy. He's not a particular lookalike for him, but his voice was it. You know, you just thought that's him, like that. So we cast him like that straight away from that.
Was there any concern about a physical likeness, or were you not bothered at all about that?
I think, look, if you're playing an iconic character like James Dean or someone, you've got to get into all of that. But you know, he's not here, so I'll say Aaron's not famous enough for us to have to worry about that stuff. You know?
Yeah, and also from Aaron's point of view, I mean, ideal to have someone that happy.
His wife, Aaron's wife, was thrilled.
Yeah,
she was really happy.
She probably makes him wear a Franco mask. Very reasonable. I like to call him the Franco style because he's monstrously good looking. Did you? I wouldn't tell him that, obviously. With his kind of comedic abilities, was that something that you felt was very key and you had to maybe inject into a story that wasn't there in Aaron's journey, or was it there?
It was there in places.
It's there in places. He's just trying to entertain himself. It's that weird thing that we have, is that the worse things get, you know, the sense of humour kicks in, and it is a spark of life left, even in the most appalling circumstances. So he does try to entertain himself. So there's a couple of scenes with Scooby-Doo, and he just lived this very, very funny message where he imagines he's on a talk show or a radio show, and people are calling in, criticising him, you know, for not telling people where he was, you know, coruscating self-criticism, really. And it's very, and so Franco's skills were really essential to it. And we did tease those up a bit more, so that the film is actually very enjoyable to watch, despite you know, the ingredients which would make you think it was a terrible ordeal, really.
Yeah, there's a very interesting moment where he when he actually breaks the bone, and he kind of sort of laughs. He sort of go, "Well, is that funny?" Was that something that Aaron talked about?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he didn't laugh, but he smiled. Is how he has it in his book, because it was a moment of liberation for him. You know, it wasn't a moment. It's not at all horrific. It's not horror movie like.
Yes.
Let me put it that way.
It's more like a Dionysian laugh of kind of triumph that he's he's figured out the way that he can get out of there, you know, because he's had this extraordinary. His brain starts coming apart with dehydration. We inquired about it. If you want to lose weight really quickly, it's very, very, very dangerous. You dehydrate, and they warned us about don't do it. You know, because it's not like carbohydrate loss, which you can sort of control and measure, because anything can happen to you once you start dehydrating. But one of the effects that happens is your brain literally starts coming apart, and he begins to hallucinate. And we do have some hallucinatory scenes in the film. And he had this hallucinatory scene of this child, which is a key to the story. And it's not like a religious image that he sees. It's quite clearly a vision of his future. And he's 27, he's playing the field, he's not really interested in having a family or anything like that, but he sees quite clearly this child that he's destined to have. And it kind of helps him see how he can get out of there. And, he writes about it in the book. I mean, it clearly is a hallucination. The child wasn't there, but it was vivid beyond belief. And it is wonderful. Some of the stuff of seeing his mind come apart is really interesting, watching all that. Because he sees, all these people come to visit him in the canyon, like friends and family and things like that, who start appearing in the canyon, and he starts talking to them as the brain begins to pull apart, really.
Were you, because it's quite a key device you use, that bringing the hallucinations into the canyon, were you confident that would work, that would read well?
Yeah, I think so. It was part of the original design of it. Was we would never leave the canyon. They're not conventional flashbacks. We kind of travel into his head a bit. And the way Danny shot them was very interesting, because Franco as an actor is actually absent from those scenes. I don't know if you picked it up, but you never see his face. Yeah. Well, only very occasionally see his face in those scenes, and they're actually played by doubles to actually bring, rather than us leaving the canyon, bring his experience into it with him, so we experience it as he did in his head.
You mentioned that initially he's not interested in settling down, he's not interested in kids and what have you. So I think we can have a quick look here at him indulging in some light flirting over a pool. Can we get down to the sort of the nitty gritty of how you actually filmed the canyon scenes and so on? How long were you in Blue John Canyon itself, or how long were you on a kind of sound stage? Did you build an exact replica?
Well, Blue John Canyon, which is where he got lost in Utah, it's in the middle of nowhere. It's absolutely so isolated. It's like 2 hours hike from any road. We filmed. It's named actually after Butch Cassidy's chef. Butch Cassidy's the cook in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids gang, the Hole in the Wall gang. He was called Blue John, and that's where they used to hide in those canyons when they'd rob banks and things like that. That's where they'd go and hide because it was so remote. Anyway, it's named after it. So, but we filmed there for a week, and it's very, very. We had to camp out in tents for a week there because you can't kind of access it really. And
we filmed there 2 weeks, but camped a week.
Yeah, camped a week. Yeah, and that was really depressing because being in the wilderness for a week is really hard because it's so silent at night. It's terrifying, So, but that's my phobia against the wilderness. But and then we replicated that canyon. We built it again in a warehouse in Salt Lake City, kind of so that because he had to spend like 4 or 5 weeks in that canyon for the shooting. So we did that in the studio, but we replicated it exactly so that it didn't move or anything, so you couldn't get lights in necessarily. So there was no sense of convenience for the crew or for James in the way that it was done. We had to replicate the experience as closely as possible for him.
So you made it harder for yourselves, effectively?
Because we thought otherwise we'll cheat, and you'll spot a cheat quite quickly. You'll get a sense that they're cheating, that the camera's cheating or something, whereas you wanted the relationship, the visual vocabulary of the film to develop out of the restrictions, that the cameramen and James had to work out how to be able to shoot it with so little space to move it.
And so the camera is never anywhere that it couldn't really have been in, as it were, and I think that's important.
Yeah.
Also in terms of realism, as the story goes on and Franco is down there for longer and longer, he looks absolutely shattered. To the extent where you look at it and think, I think he is shattered. I think you can act being that shattered. Were you working him unbelievably hard?
we did work. We did. People aren't allowed to do 7 days a week, but we did do 7 days a week. And he has these colleges that he attends in New York, and he had to fly back on his day off. And so he was. And I mean, he was. We tried to. You have to be very careful, as I said, about weight and things like that with dehydration and all that. But we did. With a story like this, you have to try and replicate it as closely as possible. So you have to put him. Obviously, you don't take it the whole way. He can go to the toilet occasionally, and
That's
he does.
Good of you.
And he does get to sleep at night in a hotel and things like that. But apart from that, it's pretty much full on. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think you said to me he was sleeping in an airport lounge one night a week.
He was, yeah.
Yeah, like Tom Hanks in what was that film?
The Terminal.
In The Terminal. He was like that. He was literally sleeping in the public lounges, waiting for planes to try and get back to us.
So he'd have a day, but the production didn't stop. We kept it rolling 7 days a week and shooting other stuff the day he wasn't there to, try and get that sense of to replicate, as Danny was saying, as closely as we could as filmmakers, the experience that he went through.
In terms of the cameras you were using, it feels like there's a lot of different cameras in there to create different effects. How did you arrive at the decision? Well, I guess to have two cinematographers is extremely novel in the first place.
Yeah, we had two units. It's a bit of a nightmare what to call them because they're meant to be absolutely equal with two cinematographers in each unit, and so you can't call them first unit and second unit, or you can't use A unit and B unit because that implies A unit's slightly more important than B unit. So we were very imaginative, and we ended up with red unit and blue unit, and it's very exciting, all the exciting stuff that goes on in films. Anyway, no, we had these digital cameras which we used on Slumdog Millionaire, and they're extremely small and flexible, and yet you get a standard of photography that's the same as film, basically. And it was particularly appropriate in this case because he took a digital camera in there with him, and as Christian was saying, he left these video messages. And so it was absolutely the right medium to use. But the canyon was so small, you'd never have got film cameras in there working properly, you know. So we used digital cameras the whole time, and they gave us and they were able to work out this. The film is, I mean, one of the dangers with a film like this is it's inert. Is it doesn't move enough.
Yeah.
And yet we always said that it was meant to be an action movie where the hero can't move, and that there should be a sense of momentum, and there's a physical momentum that he is resourceful. He just try to get out of there the whole time. And because these cameras are small and flexible, they don't have to be on stands or anything like that, there's a sense of movement in the film which is really surprising, considering the fact that he's stuck literally in one position. But there was also a momentum he had in his heart, of course, which was he was changing as a person, and he does say, Ralston, although he left an arm in there, that he left there a much fuller person, a more complete person than when he went in there, you know. And he uses the story for inspirational, you know, for motivational speaking and to inspire people who've struggled with their own boulders, as he puts it, you know, with cancer or with bereavement or, you know, it's amazing the way the story resonates around the world, yeah.
And that sense of movement you're talking about comes not just from camera, but also we should talk about from editing.
Yeah.
Which our editor John Harris found a way to take those images and bump Frank. I mean, with very little to cut to in a conventional sense. So he found a way of bumping James Franco around the frame, which gives a tremendous sense of movement, even though you're looking at a guy stuck in one place. So it's a combination of all the things that Danny's talking about in terms of performance and camera, but also editing too, very important in this film.
But when you went into it, although you wrote your 6-page treatment, were you nervous because you've got the first sort of 20 minutes or something, without giving too much away about when the kind of event happens? It's very kinetic, it's very adrenaline fueled, it's very high paced, and then you go to essentially static, where you had to try and maintain, you know, that sense of movement. Did you know that you'd be able to do it, or what did it feel like a risk?
Yeah, it's a risk, but it's but you know, you say to people.
Christian thought it was a risk. I think. Look at his face.
No, I've got something else to say, but I'll let him speak first.
You tell people, you'll say anything to get a film made.
Of course.
Mean, and so you have this confidence about you, which may be shallow, but it's you know it sounds convincing that you know you think it will work, and that was always we had a litany of ideas worked out that we tell the studio why it was going to be, and the most exciting movie they'd ever been involved in, you know, and despite the fact that it's 6 days, a guy alone, and he cuts his arm off at the end of it, which was what they thought it would be. But I've lied like that before. I remember lying. I remember saying I made a film called Millions about these kids, and I remember speaking to the studio guy, and I said it'll be a mixture of Trainspotting and Amelie. I remember saying that to him, and he said, "Well, it's." I went, "Yeah, absolutely." And, so you know, you lie all the time, but to get it made.
There was a moment in Slumdog Millionaire. I mean, yes, of course it's a risky moment, but that's what makes making films fun. It's like if you can get through that moment, and then the film will work. And on Slumdog, there was this moment about 20 minutes in, or maybe a bit longer, where we've been with these 3 kids, and then they get on a train, and in the space of 45 seconds, they roll off a train, and we change the 3 actors from the 3 kids to 3 older kids. We change the language from Hindi to English, and what was the other thing that changes?
Location.
The location, yeah. And we'll move forward 5 years in time, that was the other thing. And it was like, Christ, if that doesn't work, we're screwed. I mean, the film won't work.
It wouldn't work, no.
And you find ways of making it work. He finds ways of making it work. So that was our analogous moment in this.
But what we did we did try and make the beginning as visceral as possible. So it was like buzzing at the beginning, that you'd had 15, 20 minutes of this incredible kind of energy of cutting and location and girls in the water, and, you know, and you're using it to create a sense of momentum that then stops, you know, because that's the physicality of the film. That's the story of the film outside words. It's just like so many images, like a modern commercial. It's like a pop video or something like that, and then it all stops. All urban life stops for him until he can start rebuilding it in his heart. You know, that was the idea of it.
There's a few shots in there where you're building up the tension, because we know what's going to happen. We just don't know when it's going to happen or exactly how it's going to happen. And so things like Franco's hand just sort of lingering on the rocks, and it really makes you. I felt physically sick. I was watching it going, oh God. Were you really, you know, pulling out all the stops to try and make sure that the viewer feels that tension and that sense of kind of dread?
It's not dread like a horror movie, and I wouldn't put on the poster I felt physically sick.
No. I mean, you can if you want, but there's no need.
We don't.
No. But it is interesting because the whole idea of it was, I thought the only way you'll ever be able to watch this and experience it, and it's an amazing story which you should experience, or I felt you should. I thought the only way you'll watch it is if you are him, is if you're put in a position where you can feel it like he feels it. So it's what we call this first-person immersive experience. It's not an objective where you cut back and constantly show wide shots to set the context. There is no context. You're just there and you don't know what to do, and you've got to try and get out. And it's weird. Some people find it very difficult to watch, but other people cheer, you know, that he's actually and they are fully involved. They've managed to get out of there. And you get the most wonderful thing, which is life being given back again in the most impossible circumstance. So we always used to say, and again it's the Trainspotting Amelie lie, we always used to say to them, this is a real feel-good movie. Never mind the feel-good movie Slumdog with a song and a dance. This is a proper feel-good movie with a deeply profound sense of life being given back again.
But it is sort of true. I mean, you've seen it. It's pleasurable. It's pleasurable to watch because it's playful and kinetic and dynamic, even though the events it describes weren't experienced as pleasure by its subject, and we do sort of experience them with him. There's another layer to it where we're experiencing it as pleasure.
The actual scene where the old limb hack.
People always do that. They always, because you're right-handed, aren't you?
Yeah, definitely get rid of this one. I think.
Yeah.
If push goes to shove, he's going. Even if this one's trapped. So I
it's true. Everybody indicates the left arm. It's wrong.
But when in the cinema I watched it in, I've rarely had the same kind of shared experience where so many gasps and kind of, oh, did you know how that you were going to put that on screen? Because it's not even that, it's not unnecessarily gory, it's not unnecessarily gruesome, but you feel the sheer sort of viscerality of it is.
That's his acting. I mean, seriously, because it's the same. It's not a horror movie, so you're not seeing people's, you know. It's not a horror movie. You don't see that very much. What you do is, it's that thing I was saying about when you get a great actor and you blow him up, his head up to 40 feet tall, and then he gets hold of a scene. He's convincing you he's going through it, and you know his arm's tucked behind his back, his real arm. But it's a brilliant piece of acting. There's an extraordinary couple of moments in it where there's one moment in it where he looks like Heath Ledger as the Joker. It's just extraordinary, kind of, you know, that intensity of performance. And that's what makes you think, oh my God, because we all watch horror movies and you go, oh, horror movies, you know, oh well. But this is like, his commitment to it as an actor takes you through it, I think, and it makes you there. And that's a tribute, because when you read the book, James had to do that. The guy describes it in the book. It's an amazing description. Not only does it takes him 40 minutes, it's pain that men never get anywhere near, really. But the most important thing about it is that it's a passageway to something else. you know, that he knows is much more valuable now than what he's going to leave behind there. You know, and that's where the inspiration comes in the story, I think, in the telling of the story, and where the emotion comes from. Through James, really, through his performance.
Let's have a quick look at the moment where he actually falls.
Oh.
And the old boulder gets him. Yeah.
So it's one of the big problems with the film was that because I love music in films, really love music, and but Aron Ralston is a big Fish fan. Do any of you know Fish, the band, the American band? You're a big Fish fan? It's really tough. I listened to hours of it, and trying to find something that we could use in the film. It's a very acquired taste, Fish. They're like a jam band. They just play for hours, you know what it's like. Oh, yeah. And then the only good bits are samples from other musicians, which you can't use because they're illegal samples and stuff like that, so it's very difficult. There's one bit of Fish in it where actually, when he's in the pool, he sings Home, Home on the Train there. That's a bit of Fish. That was our acknowledgement to Fish. It was very difficult to find a bit that would work for us. So we used a lot of other music, obviously, in the end.
I think Fish might use that in their promotional material. It was very difficult to find any of our work.
Oh, no, I didn't mean it. They're very nice. But
this filmmaking experience, I assume, was the polar opposite of your experience of making Slumdog Millionaire, in terms of, you know, isolation or a city of, like, you know, 1 billion people or something. Was that a conscious decision? You thought, okay, we'll just go and do something totally different?
It looks like that, definitely, and it's certainly, but it's not really the reason you do it. You do it because it's not really because it's different. You do it because it's the thing that kind of picks you, really. It's that cliche where you say you don't pick it, it picks you. For some reason, it's the one you just become obsessive about, and you want to kind of try and convince people. So I tried to convince him first about it, you know, and you can find yourself on that mission. And then you realise, obviously, it's very different, and that's great because it'll refresh everybody, because you won't be tempted to try and make the same film again, and you'll try and use different techniques and try and find the organic life of the story, so then express that through the cameras. This one was easy because it was digital cameras, because he had one. It felt very natural to use those cameras for the film. So it's more that it's the importance of the story to you. It's more that than it looks particularly different, although it's nice that they do.
And there are strange similarities between them as well. I think they're both films about belonging. They're both films about the extremes of experience. There are strange similarities that you find in them.
Yeah.
Have you been interested in other kind of stories of isolation or other films that deal with it? So you know, I mean, Buried has obviously come out, which is just a very different film, but again, focused on one actor in a confined space, and then even something like the film about the hospital, Brian Keenan and John McCarthy.
Yeah, an Evil
I
Cradling.
can't think of the name of the film. Blind something.
Blind Flight.
Yes,
Evil
exactly.
Cradling's the book it's based on. Yeah. I always wanted to make a film of
It's a great book.
Evil Cradling. It's a great book. One of the world's great books. That. And I always wanted to make that. That's two guys who were chained to a radiator in Beirut for like 5 years together. An Irish journalist and a British journalist, I think now. But I'd always been attracted to that. As I said, I think there's something wonderful about film that it magnifies things. Yeah, it can magnify the smallest thing and make it significant, really, in our lives, really. And it is very. And this story is an absolute mythic story, really. It's very, very simple. It's just one man on his own with a rock, and so you have to look inside. It becomes a story about inside that person, and that's what it magnifies, not the landscape and not the things that you blow up and things like that. You know.
I think we've probably opened the. How long have we been going for? Roughly 40 minutes. I didn't look at my watch. Should have done. I'll open the floor up to questions. So just sort of pop your hand up, and then a lady or a gentleman will be over with a microphone. I've seen this guy at the back, probably quite difficult to get to. Sorry.
Hi. Did this film feel different to films you made in the past where you didn't write the script? Did it feel a bit more personal because you'd co-written it yourself, or no?
Yeah, no, I wasn't very keen to write it, actually, because I don't really think of myself as a writer. But we approached Simon, who's not here tonight because there's flu in the family. And we assumed he'd want to write it because Simon's a climber. You know, he's a proper climber. He's been up the Eiger and everything. But he didn't want to do it really because I think he sensed I had an obsessive approach to it. I had a kind of angle on it, and he said I think he thought I should write it out first, try and write it out first, and then maybe he would come in and improve it, which he did, thank God. But we were talking, both of us, about it, that there is something personal about it, which surprised us. Because it's actually, as I said, I'm not a big wilderness guy. I'm not a climber. I don't really relate to that world. But actually, of course, the story's not really about that. It's actually about a 27-year-old guy, and I can just about still remember what it was like to be 27. And you know, how emotionally irresponsible you are, really, which is what he is in the story, and he's admitted to. And I've had a long time to learn that about myself, whereas he learns it in 127 hours, you know. And I think Simon felt the same as well. So it felt very weirdly personal film, yeah. And strangely, surprisingly, yeah.
Yes, a girl here.
Hi, I wanted to ask you, people say there a lot about your work and how each film is very different from the last, and we kind of touch on it over here as well. But when the trailer opens, there's clips of Slumdog, of 28 Days Later, the titles splash on screen. How do you feel your films relate to one another, being so different? How does your work come together in that way? Can you speak a bit about that?
I'm not really not very good at that. Really, it's much better that other people do that. Really, I believe there are. I mean, you worry sometimes that it's the same film you're making them, and you think it's the same bloody film because we've just made this one, or you know, made one like this before. You do bump into yourself sometimes, weirdly, strangely enough. But no, what you're trying to do is you're trying to concentrate on the story, you know, and not your own necessarily like a particular way of expressing it that will connect with another film that you've made. You're not like trying to make a canon of films or a body of work. You're just trying to work, really, and you hope that you'll get to work again. I know that sounds like fakely modest, but you do think, will I ever work again? You know, sometimes you do think like that, and you just get the chance to make a film again. You want to make a story that really means something to you, and then, of course, I suppose there are things that connect them. But you change over time the things that matter to you, I suppose, as well. So I'm not very well equipped to answer that, really. But it's interesting when you hear people talk about them. They do find connections in them, you know. And it's self-consciousness is a big danger, I think. You have to avoid it, and you do get very self-conscious when you're promoting films. But fortunately, there's weird. You forget when you start to make another film. You forget these occasions. You know, when you've talked more objectively about things, and you become more subjective again, and and that's important to lose that self-consciousness, I think.
Yes, this lady here. Use both.
Hello.
Don't use both.
Shall I? I'm going to do something I really hate, which is start a question with a butt-licky compliment, because I saw the film last night. It's extraordinary. It's brilliant.
Oh, cool.
This one here.
Oh, thank you very much.
Brilliant. It's a bit of a twatty question as well, because there's
You're doing well.
There's a scene in the film, obviously. You see a little clip of it in the trailer when he first realises that he's in deep poo, and it pulls back and he's screaming for help. How did you do that? Because, I mean, you must have used some kind of aerial shot from a helicopter, but, I mean, it's really long from, like, deep on his face and straight up. I'm just curious how you did that.
We can show that clip.
Great.
I'd
Whoever likes it, it's an extraordinary shot.
She's a
Can we have a look at this? Yeah. You did well. I mean, the intro's horrible, but...
So that's the real canyon he got trapped in. That's the actual place where he got trapped. And the way we did it is we shot James in our studio, like warehouse canyon, and we had a tiny little crane that just took him to begin with, and then you photograph the real place from a helicopter, and they do it actually with stills. They take a series of high standard stills as the helicopter rises up like that, and then they blend them all together and put James in there really from the beginning of it like that. So I shouldn't really tell you all that. It's telling you it's all done.
Yeah, I mean, what we wanted to hear is sort of you with a jetpack. It's worth bearing in mind. Oh, yes. I don't know where I'm... Yes, here we go.
Sorry, could I ask you what cameras... You said you used digital cameras, and I was wondering whether you'd be kind enough to sort of just say which ones you used.
We used a series, and we also use these in Slumdog. They're called silicon imaging 2Ks, and they are similar to a camera that you'll probably be more familiar with, the Red, what's called the Red. But what's wonderful about them, the Red is in a housing. It's got like a body around it. So it's actually not that different to a film camera in terms of size. The silicon imaging 2K is still in units. So the lens, the body of the head of the camera and the lens sit separately from the recorder, which you can put on the cameraman's back, a hard drive, really. So they're incredibly flexible. They're not easy to operate. You have to have great operators to use them, because they sometimes need a gyro underneath them to stabilize them. But it does mean that you can do this kind of work You can go anywhere. And as James moves, the cameraman can just move with him and mirror his movements or go against them like that. So they're a wonderful camera. So that was one camera. We also use the Canon stills camera, the D5 and the D7. And what we do with that, we use that on we sometimes use bits of video, but most of the time we use it on burst mode. And it takes 12 frames a second. And you get this slight stuttering effect. But it's very, very high quality. It's very beautiful. And there's lots of images in the film that are shot like that, which shouldn't really be in movies. But I think people have changed the appetite of people, what they'll watch. Everything doesn't have to be exactly the same from beginning to end. The grading can change and the quality can change. And if you've got reasons organic in the story, and like he had a stills camera with him and a poor quality video camera. Which we used as well, the Canon Allura. Some of that was recorded on that as well. Then people accept that change of diet, the change of the look in the film. And I think, because you've all got cameras in your pockets now. And if there's a problem on the tube, everybody takes images. You see it on the news straight away. People's cameras in the phone. So everything's changing like that, and digital is finally arriving. So those were the main ones we used for it. We used a bit of film as well occasionally, but mostly it was those ones. Yeah.
Thinking about more taglines, I think the Canon Allura will be using a very poor quality camera. This gentleman here.
He meant a domestic video camera.
Yeah.
Hello. What about the involvement in the Olympic ceremony project? Is you treat it like a film project? Is it like you're involved in it for half a year, or is it like sometimes a meeting? Which way does it work?
Yeah, we just started. We're just working on the opening ceremony of the 2012 Olympic Games in London, and it's just started. We've been working on it for a few months. No, not like a film. We're not trying to make it like a film at all. We're trying to make it like a live event. It's a stadium of 80,000 people. So there's a huge television audience as well, but we're trying to make it particularly for those 80,000 people in the stadium. And it's interesting. Beijing was an extraordinary kind of pinnacle of those kind of a certain kind of ceremony. Very, very spectacular. And we're going to try and go back to the basics again, really, of what the ceremony's for. And it will still be spectacular, we hope, but it'll be a chance to start again, really. Because I think nobody can outdo Beijing. Nobody's got those resources, or nobody kind of has a kind of military economy like that can do what they did in theirs. So it's a great opportunity to start again. And, some of the fundamentals of it's sport and welcoming the athletes to the city. And we'll see. We're just working on it, and we're just beginning to work on it properly, yeah.
You slightly nervous? Pretty big.
Yeah, it's pretty big, isn't it? But there's no point being nervous about it, because you just never get anywhere. You just freeze, So you think, well, we might as well do it. And, we're in a position where, you should do that. You should step up to the plate and do that kind of job, really, because also I love sport and I live in the area. The stadium's just around the corner, so I feel very attached to the whole idea of it, yeah.
Would you have taken it on if you hadn't done kind of theatre stuff before? It's, in a sense, the live event, it's almost more theatrical.
It is a bit, yeah. No, I'm working in the theatre at the moment. I'm working on Frankenstein at the National at the moment, and we're just rehearsing. We're in the middle of rehearsing that at the moment. And it's funny going back to theatre, actually. It's weird stepping back to it after I've not been done it for a long time. But yeah, I love live events, and there is something magical about it when it really works. So hopefully it'll work, and or Frankenstein will work as well. So and they're very special, those live events as well.
There's a few get neglected over here. This one.
Hi, I watched A Life Less Ordinary recently, one of your older films, and I really enjoyed it, but it doesn't look like a budget film, even though it was made quite cheaply, as I understand. I wonder do you feel like you sort of achieve more when you make a critically acclaimed film or a successful film on a lower budget? Do you prefer working in Hollywood or more independent, obviously with the UK Film Council kind of going under? Do you kind of feel like it's important to maintain the independent feel towards films like this? Film feels very much more independent than mainstream, although I think it's going to be like a massive success. What's your thoughts on that?
You're very sweet. You're the only person who's ever described Life Less Ordinary as critically acclaimed.
That is its piece of critical acclaim.
It was a disaster, the film. Although I liked it, and Belgium liked it, actually, as well. What happens with...
yes.
Seriously. When you have a hit film, there's always one territory where it doesn't work. And conversely, when you have a disaster, there's always one territory where it does work. And Lifeless Ordinary was a hit, was #1 in Belgium for 3 weeks. Unbelievable. I'm very proud of that, anyway. No, I like making... I made a film after that, actually, which was a much bigger budget, and it didn't suit me, The Beach. I didn't make a very good job of it, and it was partly... Yeah, it was entirely my fault, but it was partly... I blamed the fact that I had too many resources. Whereas the search for resources, the search for ways of doing the film, where we sit down together and go, what are we going to do? We can't afford 1,000 people. We're not going to get them there. And you just have to think differently about it, you know. So that's what... So I'd always prefer that as a way of doing it. But you have to say that's not... There are so many different ways that people do it, you know. And it depends. You should only try and do what suits, what brings out your best work, really, I think. But I'm very grateful for you too, bringing up Lifeless Ordinary.
Yeah. I mean, she's Belgian, so...
Yes, you formed Belgium.
One of these ones done. Oh, this one's got a microphone.
Hi, I just saw the film a few hours ago and I feel like I'm still emotionally recovering from it as well, which is a good thing. My question is about the sounds in the film. I know you talked about the silence of the wilderness, but what I took away from it more was the soundtrack and how powerful it was and how much it came across and the kind of relationship between how much he speaks to himself in the camera and also like the soundtrack and trying to achieve the balance between the two. Yeah,
I mean, the soundtrack's done by Aron Ralston, who's the composer in Slumdog Millionaire, an amazing composer, and we were very lucky to be able to get him to work on this film again, on another of our films again, and it's also done, the actual sound is done by this guy called Glenn Fremantle, who's done all our films, and listen, sound is actually 70% of a movie. You don't think it is, because everybody goes on about the look of the film and the cameras that you use and things like that, but sound is 70% of a movie, always, and most especially in this film, where it's literally the only other character in it, really. So you have this manipulation, this wonderful use that Aron Ralston makes of the soundtrack. You have Glenn doing all the sound effects as such, and then we throw in these pop songs now and then. You know, some of which you recognise because they're like Bill Withers' Lovely Day, which is used in a way like... I mean, we did do that before. Someone was saying about... I was saying about having done it before in a film. We use Perfect Day in Trainspotting, and we do it again in this film. It's really disappointing. We use a kind of song, ironically, you know, given the circumstances that he's in, we use this Bill Withers track in this one. But they become characters in the film, where because you lack conventional characters, you kind of introduce these songs as characters as well. So I'm glad you like the soundtrack on it. Yeah, I love doing the music.
And the sound design brought all those little details really, really close. Glenn Fremantle did a brilliant job of, you know, the grit in an eye or the sound of a nan over a knife or all these tiny, tiny things that are really important to him. And I don't think you're conscious of them really when you're watching them particularly, but I think they all contribute to the overall effect of the film.
By all means.
I was just wondering how you feel about how the authenticity of the film is affected by the kind of conflation of the actor's story and the real story. I know you touched on it a bit, but you said earlier that you did some of his speech verbatim and then you changed some of it. And I saw on one of your documentaries that they changed the fish T-shirt because the costume designer changed the fish T-shirt because fish was so obvious to a different one. I was just wondering how you feel about how the authenticity is affected.
It's really interesting. We said to Aron when we first met him that you know, we wanted to make a fiction of his story, although it would be truthful. And it's because even if you make a documentary, it's a fiction. You edit so much that you are expressing an attitude to it. You are fictionalizing it by editing, really. So I think again, there's no... I mean, I love documentaries, but I want to make it as a fiction with an actor playing the part. And because we have to be responsible to him, it is very accurate, but I want the ability to leave that absolute documentary fact, if necessary, and do something that is imaginary, in a way, but that does illustrate a greater truth. And we did this. There is an extraordinary sequence in it where Jane. Those who've seen it, he does all these different voices because he hears himself on a TV phone-in show, really. And it is an extraordinary piece of acting, and it didn't happen to Aron. But when Aron saw the film, he said that didn't happen, but it's truthful. He said, I felt like that. That's what I felt like. And we hadn't asked him. So you have to have part of you that's instinctive, that's working instinctively, and the actor, and like Simon, and the cameraman that's not just trapped by facts the whole time. You have to be able to express yourself, you know, and fiction gives you the ability to do that. But you have to promise the subject, especially if he's still alive, that when you finish and when you hand the story back to him, that you won't have dishonored the story in any way. You know, that he'll believe it's faithful to his experience, which he does, thank God. Yeah.
And we were pretty true to the core.
As it happens, yeah.
You know, in terms of the equipment he had on him and how long he was down there for and what his strategies were to get out and all that stuff. That's all accurate. And there's an old distinction between story and plot, and story is what happens and plot is how you tell it. And I think everyone's entitled to tell it the way they want.
Maybe one more question. This poor lady has been, so...
Hi. The first time I watched it, for some reason, the film reminded me of Catcher in the Rye. And watching it a second time, I felt Aron's character, somebody outside the events of what happens to him, people would aspire to because he's such an individual. But I feel the film shows that in order to be an individual, you have to acknowledge people around you. And society, society needs the individual, and the individual needs society to function. And I feel that although it's about one person in one place and it's a personal thing, it has a very global meaning, especially now in the times we live in.
I think so. He begins the film and he is the most wonderful example for an American audience. He's an individual, he's self-reliant, self-sufficient, he looks like he doesn't need anybody. He sets himself lots of targets, he achieves them all, you know, he's an athlete, he's got everything going for him. It's just like, yes, it's perfect. And he doesn't need anybody else. It's just like I think of America sometimes, you know, especially the Tea Party in America, think of themselves like that. And actually what happens to him at the end of the movie is he gets out of that canyon and he sees in the distance this very simple Dutch family who were out walking. And if he hadn't met them, if he hadn't seen them, he'd have died, he'd have a blood loss. And this incredible individual who thought he was so self-sufficient shouts at the top of his voice, "I need help," which is really what the film's about, really, is his admittance of that, you know? And in that sense, it is a political film, in a kind of tiny way. We always thought of it like that, though it's meant to be very personal as well. But it is about the crowd. It begins with these images of crowds, and it ends with him swimming back to these crowds that he's run away from at the beginning, and that's the basic idea of the film, yeah.
OK, I think that is all we've got time for, but all that remains to be said really is thank you very much, Danny Boyle and Christian Colson. And obviously, thanks for coming down. So we are all here to talk about the film 127 Hours, or at least listen to other people talk about it. And what ideal people. I'm delighted we're joined by the team who are behind 127 Hours. You probably recall their previous film, it did OK. They are producer Christian Colson and the director Danny Boyle.
Hello.
How you doing?
Hey. Hello.
Hello. Hello. How are you both? You all right?
Yeah, very good.
Very good. Thank you for coming in and chatting to us. Do you enjoy doing these sort of things as a duo to make it easier?
Much easier.
It's much better, actually, doing them together, yeah, definitely.
Well, I think we'll be the judge. We will.
Good crowd. Thank you
I guess, first of all, when did you each become aware of Aron Ralston's incredible story?
Well, I heard about it in 2003, which is when it happened. I read about it in the newspapers, and it's one of those stories like the Chilean miners that snags in your brain. And I think it's because I've had a lot of time to think about it, of course, since. I think it's because it's one of those where you put yourself in that position. You think, would I do that? Could I do that if I was there? And like with the Chilean miners, it's a bit more fun because it's obviously you think, would I be the sporty one, or would I be the medic, or the brave one, or the priest, or
which is it?
The snivelling weak one.
Which would you be?
The snivelling weak one.
Sure.
But in this case, it's not quite so much fun because it's actually what would I do with my arm if I was stuck there like that. But anyway, and then I read his book in 2006, and it was amazing. I had a very kind of intense feeling of knowing how to do it, which is you don't get very often, and. I sort of knew I wanted to make it like we made it, and we approached Aron about it. But you have to say to him, we want to tell our own version. And although we want you, and we showed him the script, and he helped us, and he was in rehearsals with us, once we actually started shooting, I said, I don't want you around the whole time, because I want the story to happen to James Franco, the actor. I don't want him looking over his shoulder the whole time, thinking, how did you do it? Because you'll sense that hesitation in the piece, you know, and it'll start to feel more like a documentary in a way. Whereas you wanted it to be, and you like you said, the difference between a documentary like Touching the Void and this, and in the end it's emotional, is the biggest difference. Is that what you get with a fiction is that what we try to do at the end of this film is you get this emotional charge running through it where you've invested in this actor like we do, and that in some way you want him to get out of there and you're prepared to almost help him. And then when he does get out of there, you get that rush of ocean to the heart, which is emotion, where you lose rationality. Because obviously James Franco didn't actually cut his arm off. You know that, but you help him do it in a way and go with it and believe it's real. And that's what I love about fiction films. And I think you can get at truth better in a way than through documentary in a way. You get at a greater truth through them.
I agree with all that, but you do have a responsibility when you're telling a story based on the experiences of a living subject to get it more or less right factually as well. So it was a balance we had to find between being true to Aron's story but still making it our own film.
Yeah, well, I suppose my sole criticism really is that Franco wasn't quite method enough. He could have turned the arm off, couldn't he? Let's have a little look at him in the incredible Utah landscape near the start of the film. The landscape.
They just explode things bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and obviously CG has allowed us to do that. You can blow up anything now, literally anything. And so there's another side of cinema which is extraordinary, which is when it magnifies things. And the basic thing cinema does, and that we all love, is you take a human head. Your head is what, about 8-9 inches high, like that.
It's a big head. Yeah.
But when you do it with an actor, it becomes 40 feet high in a kind of place, in a dark hole, in this room you go to with strangers and sit there. And there's something weird about that, and very, very important about that. The actors may be awful people who are in celebrity magazines and things like that, but for some reason we fall in love with them, or we hate them, but we want to go and watch them. And like Russell Crowe's a very good example, for instance, and about what people feel about it. But there's something about them that you want to kind of watch them on that scale. And this story does that more than anything else, because it gives him, the only thing he's got to perform with is a rock. And of course the rock's not going to be very interesting, so it means you've got to find the right actor you're just going to be able to cut to the whole time,
Do you find yourself sort of drawn to stuff that is more challenging? I imagine that if someone says to you, no, that's not going to work as a film, it's like a red rag to a bull. If someone says to you, go with an easier project.
No, it depends who's saying that, of course, and what the project is. I never really wanted to make big, huge movies, because I love watching them, and people like Chris Nolan and people like that, I admire them enormously, and what they do, and I love watching those movies. But I always think I'm better taking a smaller budget, really, and trying to make it look like $100 million if you can. I don't really. I think if I had $150 million, it would look like 100. But he wanted to make it as a documentary then, whereas I wanted to make it with an actor. And you lose yourself in an actor playing the part. It's just like any fiction film, really, and that you go on the journey with him, and it becomes a kind of a first-person immersive experience. So, but we had to wait until we had a hit. We got Slumdog, and then that allowed us to get finance for the film, because it's obviously a tough film to finance, I think.
Yeah, what did convince you that it would be better as a feature than as a feature doc? Because something like Touching the Void, you kind of think, well, yeah, that was fantastic, and in similar territory.
Well, I think it's that quality of immersion that a feature film can give you that a documentary never can, or prose either. I mean, Aron's book is fantastically well written, but not obviously in film. I first read it in 2009. It'd been knocking around Danny's head 3 years. And I read the story and thought it was fantastic, but how do you make a movie out of this?
Yeah.
It's one guy, one location, very little dialogue. But he figured out a way to do it. And I think if you can pull it off as a movie, what you get is you're putting the audience through the experience in a way that no other medium can replicate. And I think it's just much more intense.
But, I mean, if you just sort of look at the story on the face of it, the limitations are quite severe. You've got one person, sort of one location. The audience know what's going to happen. So in a way, you've got to create your own tension, your own drama, because they know. So when you first approached it, how did you convince yourself that you could do it?
I think it was because it's very. It's not like movies have become 130 by the time it was finished, And I think it's always better to go the other way, because I love that sense of, and it's inbuilt in this story, that sense of limitation, restriction, that there's a kind of challenge inherent in the movie. I love that and then you try and persuade the crew and everybody to become. You try and be evangelical with them and make them go on a mission with you to convert people to the movie, you know, because people often suspect that will never make a movie, like Trainspotting, things like that, you know.
How quickly did Danny convince you that he could pull this off?
Well, he sent me the book, and then he sent me a treatment that he'd written. A 6-page outline. I don't know how many of you have seen the film, but which began to outline a grammar by which we could overcome some of these obstacles that you've been talking about in terms of the location, the one character, the no dialogue. And it involved, it was a particular way of telling a story which magnified tiny incidents, so that really, really tiny things like the sun coming up or the character dropping his knife or close-up of an eye take on this very disproportionate significance. It's a great way to tell the story through the aggregation of tiny details, but also the camera becoming the narrator. That was in the original treatment, as a way of keeping movement in something which, if you do it wrong, will always be static. When I read that, I was convinced pretty quickly. Yeah.
Did you feel that your hands were tied, which is not the right choice of phrase, by making a film with the actual person kind of looking over your shoulder?
I'd never done it before. It's weird because you obviously you have to respect him because it's extraordinary what he did, and he has his own telling of the story.